Hello, thank you for joining me today. And there's been some really sad news lately, and I know that this has been broadcast all over the news, all over the world, in terms of what's been going on with Gabby Petito. Can't pronounce the name correctly. Gabby Petito and her partner Brian Laundrie, who were living van life. They were traveling around the world. They were traveling wherever they wanted, all over the States. And there's been a lot of discussion. And I thought that the discussion was well worth kind of bringing up today, because there were some really important lessons that this couple teach us that I think we should take note of, and I think we should apply to ourselves, and really just listen to what's come out of this. And I think that what happened is so sad, and I am not applying any judgment. I am encouraging everybody to obviously bear have your own outcome, if you like, your own judgment of the situation. And I don't wish to get involved or to step on any toes in terms of lawmaking, law breaking, legal procedures or anything like that. But I do think it's worth bearing in mind, because obviously I talk about abuse, domestic abuse, and divorce and separation. And this really made me sad. And there was an amazing lady who has basically done a lot of work in terms of decoding the situation, shall we say. Julie Perkins Cantrell is the lady concerned, and she did an amazing post on Facebook about the tragic events. And the case is still under investigation, and we can only make assumptions based on the textbook patterns of abuse that we've witnessed too many times to count. And that multiple families are grieving here, and I have a massive amount of empathy for everyone involved. But there are an awful lot of survivors that will resonate with at least some of the insights I'm going to go through. And I'm hoping that we can use this tragedy to shift the way that we, as a culture, approach the complicated issue of domestic abuse. Okay. So followers on social media saw a smiling, happy couple full of love and wanderlust setting out for a cross-country adventure while documenting all of the joys of young life. And in many cases, targets became very good at smiling through the pain. When the public was shown body camera footage captured by the Moab City police officer Daniel Robbins, who pulled Laundrie and Petito over after the 911 call on August the 12th, some viewers assumed that Petito was suffering from a mental illness, and Laundrie, whilst nervous, was the steadier of the two. And other viewers assumed that both partners were equally at fault, and the old "it takes two" myth that doesn't really apply to most abusive situations. And some people even assumed that Petito was the abuser and Laundrie was the victim. And those three assumptions probably crossed everyone's mind as a possibility, because they crossed mine. And healthy-minded people tend to give others the benefit of the doubt, especially when someone is being accused of a negative act. And also, we can all understand that mental illness is a really difficult situation, and it can tax even the kindest and most gentle of souls and the people that love them. And unfortunately, in many cases, this thought pattern leads us to assume that the victim is mentally ill or the victim is to blame for an altercation. Now, victim blaming can happen even in the worst cases of abuse, because we don't see the whole story unfolding. And what we don't see is that the target has managed to keep things together until they reach their threshold, their breaking point, at which time we may see them crying, yelling, breaking down emotionally. And because they end up crying, yelling, or breaking down completely, many people might assume that the target's crazy, and it's natural for us to feel as though the more stable person is more trustworthy. But if we listen carefully to Laundrie's conversation with the officers, he even laughs and says she's crazy. It's 17.09 during the video. And then he dismisses it as a joke. Of course, he's already put this claim in the officers' minds, and by the way, just the offhanded way that he says it, many might assume that it's not the first time he's said these words. So while viewers and officers start wondering if perhaps the target is crazy, the abuser plays the part of the poor patient partner who has had to deal with this irrational person in the video. And Laundrie mentions Petito's anxiety and her OCD, painting her as an unstable partner. And I am not at all justifying any physical violence against either party. No one should intentionally harm any other person. Full stop. A typical abuser is skilled at convincing people that they're innocent, while in fact they've been acting very differently behind closed doors, pushing their target to breaking point intentionally, and then feeding on their emotional break. And many abusers love to see evidence that they've hurt their target. They love to see their target in pain. And for this very reason, breaking the target is usually the goal from the start. In cases of abuse, it may take an abuser hours, weeks, months, or even years to break the target. And they won't stop until they get that reaction. And then they'll point the finger and say, see, she's crazy. I'm just trying to keep her calm. And then he'll do it again and again and again. And as a result, some people buy into that false narrative. Even the target can be brainwashed into doubting their own truth, which may be one reason that we see Petito making many excuses for Laundrie's behavior and taking the blame for everything. And in contrast, we see Laundrie blaming Petito, insisting that he's never hit her and saying that he was just trying to keep her calm. He's charming. He comes across as the loving and loyal partner. He's joking around with the officers and even gives one a fist bump in the end. All the while, his fiancée is at risk of being charged with domestic assault and possibly spending the night in jail. And later on, we'll hear the 911 recording that it seems the responding officers were not fully informed of at the time. I'd like to report a domestic dispute. The 49-second audio recording continues as the caller says the gentleman was slapping the girl. When the dispatcher asks him to confirm that the man was slapping the girl, the caller responds, yes. And then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk and he proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off. But long before the 911 call was made public, many survivors could already see through the spin playing out on the video footage. They easily recognized the red flags because these cycles become the norm for victims of long-standing abuse. And many targets eventually become conditioned to believe everything the abuser does is their fault, covering for the abuser, accepting all of the blame, trying harder to make the abuser happy. This warped reality becomes the only truth a target knows. And also it seems clear that Petito doesn't want her fiancé to be in any trouble. She'd rather pay the price and protect the man that she loves. And because she probably believes he only acted this way because of her mood, her behaviors, her anxiety, her OCD, her job, she doesn't want him to be blamed. This is also the norm in abusive relationships. And many experienced and well-trained officers see right through this typical pattern, and others buy the cover-up story. And sadly, because some officers are also abusers, some side with the abuser, even when they know exactly what's going on. And throughout the video, we get the sense that Officer Robbins senses there's more to this story. And, full credit to the police in Petito's situation, especially Officer Robbins. The 4 responding officers, 2 of whom were park rangers, remained calm. They separated the couple. They interviewed them individually. They split them up for the night. They consulted the domestic violence shelter. And many people would say that they did everything right considering the information that they had at that time. And I can only imagine that the officers involved could well be suffering from some tremendous guilt and wondering if they could have done anything differently and prevented Petito's death. But I want to give credit to the officers in this case, because whilst it's easy to look back and say maybe they should have handled things differently, maybe they could have done something better, knowing what we now know, it's impressive how well they treated both Laundrie and Petito. And sadly, I was thinking how rare it is to see that level of respect and professionalism in most cases of domestic violence, particularly in the South, where, Julia has been most involved with survivor stories. After Petito was reported missing, many people expressed shock in response to the Laundrie family's refusal to cooperate early in the investigation. Now, Petito reportedly lived with the Laundrie family for more than a year. Anyone can see that this family will do anything to protect their son, even at the cost of an innocent young woman who was a real part of their family, and soon to be their daughter-in-law. And while most of us can certainly understand parents wanting to protect their son, most would agree that they crossed the moral line when his fiancée went missing. But perhaps it goes deeper than that. Perhaps what we're seeing is a system of enablers who not only allowed their son to abuse Petito, which may have been a factor in her reported anxiety, but also a stream of gaslighters who may have always been shifting the truth to keep Petito confused and make her believe that she was the problem. And it's not too far a stretch to assume that Petito was caught in a system of abuse. And once a target is caught in that psychological web, it's extremely difficult to find a way out, and reality becomes flipped. It's also worth noting that Petito and Laundrie had been involved in various levels of a relationship since their teens, and this is also commonly observed in dysfunctional partnerships. These immature relationships work beautifully when both partners grow together and mature emotionally, but when one wants to keep the other down, naive, and under their control, and the other is growing, learning, and maturing, it doesn't work. We hear Petito telling the officer that Laundrie didn't think she could succeed with her travel blog. It seems clear that he didn't believe in her and that he was trying to make her doubt herself. And throughout the conversation, he implies that he locked her out of the van because she wouldn't calm down. But when we listen to the full video, it seems that he was upset because they'd spent too much time at the coffee shop with her working on her website when he wanted to go hiking. Now, this suggests that because she wasn't in the van when he was ready to leave, he lost his temper. In the moments that followed, the altercation became physical. Reportedly, Laundrie squeezed Petito's face with his hand, cut her down verbally, and criticized her. And some would argue that this escalating abuse typically persists until the target reacts emotionally and or physically. If this case follows the norm, Laundrie may have been trying to break her spirit intentionally. Why? Again, because if this case follows the typical situation, it would likely be because Petito's focus wasn't 100% on Laundrie. She had found this new job that she enjoyed. She was succeeding, and it was allowing her to connect with other people. Because don't forget, she'd already left her job as a nutritionist to travel around the country with Laundrie. And in a healthy relationship, that new job might be considered a positive opportunity for Petito, especially considering Laundrie admits they have very little money, not even enough to afford a hotel room to prevent his fiancée from going to jail. But in an unhealthy relationship, the abuser wants the target all to themselves. And when that doesn't happen, he can become increasingly violent. So Petito now has this one little piece of her life that Laundrie couldn't control. So if we're looking at textbook patterns, perhaps her blog angered him. Perhaps he didn't like all the attention she was getting on social media. Perhaps he punished her for it. And then a cycle developed. And even though she was doing nothing wrong, by building a new career, that they both would have benefited from. And the next thing we know, we have a missing person, a recovered body, a young man on the run, and several families destroyed. Too much grief to measure. And the truth is, it will happen again tomorrow and the next day and the next day until we learn to recognize and respond to abusive situations in healthier ways. So the overall takeaway from this is when we see someone at their emotional end during a domestic dispute, we shouldn't assume she's crazy or they're crazy, because it could be a man or a woman. We shouldn't buy into the false narrative given by the abuser, and we shouldn't believe the cover-up story by the target, who has been conditioned to carry all of the blame and shame, and we shouldn't assume that they're going to be okay. Instead, we should all learn the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationships. We should learn to recognize the warning signs of abuse, and we should engage in respectful, fact-based conversations about trauma bonds, abusive cycles, and emotional intelligence. We should be familiar with terms like gaslighting, hoovering, love bombing, enabling, triangulating, and projecting, and we should stop blaming targets and help them reclaim their truth. We should stop repeating the age-old myths that keep targets trapped in these dangerous and all too often deadly cycles. And finally, whilst we've used the most common scenario of male on female violence in this article, we should recognise that abuse crosses all barriers and can impact anyone regardless of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nationality, religion, affiliation, age, or socio-economic level. And we should stop assuming these situations will get better in time. I haven't heard of one abusive relationship that became healthier. Not one. Not with therapy, not with church, not with prayer or forgiveness or complete surrender. And when an abuser is determined to destroy their target, they will not stop until that target is erased from this world or stripped from their life. And in many cases, they'll walk away without any consequences, often taking the target's finances, home, vehicle, reputation, or even their children with them. Please don't be the next statistic. Please don't let someone you love be the next statistic. And if you need support, contact the Domestic Violence Hotline from a safe phone called 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 88788. If you're in the UK, go to www.womensaid.org.uk. I think for me, the story is so sad, and the story has an ending that is so predictable in so many ways, and it breaks my heart to see yet another person die at the hands of an abuser. And Julie has created this article beautifully, and all credit to Julie for basically vocalizing the words that were going on in so many of our heads, because abuse is never okay. And this just highlights for so many the abuse that happens behind closed doors so many times. This really just breaks my heart. What if this was your daughter? What if this was your son? What if this was your sister or your brother or your mom or your dad? How long is it going to take before we stop this? How long before women can live without fear? How long before abuse is not considered to be okay? And that's where I'm going to leave this with you, because this highlighted so eloquently for me a situation that not only I have lived through, but millions of others have lived through. And The takeaway from this is, please don't let Gabby's death be a statistic, and please don't let Gabby's death be just a blip on the radar. We need to make this count. We need to make people realize that this is not okay in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to go now, because I'm starting to get emotional. But yeah, please like, subscribe, join me, find me, talk with me, leave your comments, and I will speak to you again on Monday. Take care.